Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Not sure who else might join today. It is recording. I know Tessa asked to have it recorded so she could look later. Well, there's Alma now joining, so I'm not sure that I expect anybody else anyway. Any questions, though, before I turn the time over to Jacob, generally from people? Okay. Well, I will reach out. There are a couple of you I want to visit with, but I'll just reach out to you separately through Slack. So go ahead, Jacob, take it away. We're going to talk a little bit more about Jupyter notebooks and Python programming today. So go ahead.
All right. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen over to the Google Doc that I created. So we can get that pulled up. Okay. So, and I do want, as in, like, if you guys have any questions or help as needed as you see fit on how to better improve it, that would be very helpful. So pretty much, Jupyter notebooks are a visualization tool that you can use in using Python or different languages. Jupyter is made up of the Julia, Python, and R-based languages, but is mostly used in Python. And we do use it a lot in the lab from what I've seen. If you remember on Friday's lab meeting last week, Riley used the Jupyter notebook for his hydroinformatics program he created. He was using it in a notebook. And if I'm not mistaken, I think OpenEDX might have a Jupyter notebook function in it as well. If you've been using that, you might have noticed how it's similar. Pretty much, it's really good at data science. It's not the best for machine learning, although they're trying to improve it in that direction, but you probably won't be doing a lot of machine learning while you're in the lab unless we get to that point. Some of the things that, as you go through this module, you'll want to do is Riley's 201 module, because we start doing a lot with the pandas database after this, or data frames, I apologize. As you're needed with the tools needed, you'll want to have a Google Drive account and HydroShare, which we'll talk about later. Also, something, as a couple people have reached out, if you have the mini Conda program or the distribution service installed instead of Anaconda, you're gonna have a harder time with a lot of the packages later and the different parts in the module, because Miniconda doesn't have nearly as much installed as Anaconda does. And so if I might add that to it, if you guys think that would be helpful. And so going down, I just pretty much included just this, like, the history of how Project Jupyter got started. There's not a whole lot to, like, the technical side and the background of it, other than these are the reason why they created them and how they work. Google Collaboratory is just Google's version of Jupyter Notebook, which was actually Project Jupyter helped them create Google Collaboratory, so it's not even really different. The biggest benefit of Colab, as they call it, is that you can use more powerful GPUs. There's no setup required, like how we went through and you had to download and create your own Jupyter notebooks through a different terminal. You don't have to do that with Colab. Colab doesn't have as nearly many widgets or options at the moment. They're trying to push Colab for more machine learning than data analysis. But right now its biggest use is in the education field. It's really popular among not necessarily computer programmers like on the college level, but more in high school. They use Google Colab for a lot of things. They also started using Google Colab if you've taken the linear algebra course, the new online one that they're doing at BYU. They use Google Colab for those lessons, I believe. And the biggest thing is you can access it anywhere with an internet connection, whereas the normal Jupyter Notebook, you can't. You have to keep that stays local to your computer. But what we use, and this is what I specifically do in the lab, is I use HydroShare. I use a lot with Quasi, and the current project I'm doing with Dr. Ames includes creating Jupyter Notebooks in the Quasi, on the Quasi server, for the HydroShare server. And it's pretty much just a Jupyter Notebook online. Like, you don't have to install it or anything. You just go to the website, you create an account, and you're able to access the Jupyter Hub and create your notebooks from there. The only downside is because it's a Jupyter Hub, they have preset environments, but you can add your own packages through, and later in the module, we talk about how to do that. Does anyone have any questions before we get into like the hands-on part? I guess not.
Actually, can you go over the idea of kernels? I was kind of confused about that. It talked about that at the beginning of the
A
module.
kernel?
Yeah.
That's a great question. So a kernel is, we'll go ahead and open it up. The kernel is mine running right now? I may have to restart it. Okay. So a kernel is pretty much just like how it knows what the environment is. Let me see if I have that link pulled up down here in the, in one of the links, it talks more extensively about what kernels are. And I think it's in this link here. So I'm going to open it up and we'll look at it. Right, so a kernel is a separate process started by the notebook web application that runs the code in the given language and returns the output back to the notebook web application. So it's pretty much just its version of its special environment. It's just like you create the environment in your Anaconda, your Miniconda prompt or PowerShell. Like I have mine open here. That's like where the environment for everything that you can run all your packages. But then a kernel is just like the individual, like almost like a branch off environment that keeps everything within that notebook. It's what keeps everything working there. And so like you can have multiple notebooks open, but if one kernel might be down in one notebook, and so you can't run it, but a kernel will be open the other, and it'll be running in the other one. And you can actually interrupt it, restart and clear out output. Here's how you actually like clear everything. You can hit the interrupt button here, or you can do it up here. Restart and clear output. It's pretty much how you reset the entire notebook. And right now, the only one I have is Python 3, but you can change the kernel to different languages right here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. Okay. And so when you're going through, it's actually, there's not a whole lot of like really in-depth technical things. It's pretty much just learning how to work and run the different, the notebook or Google Colab, and then HydroShare later on. There's not much of a difference with HydroShare. And so that's why I have you read through these documents here, or these applications. And I call them an application because if you've noticed when you go to it, it doesn't say .com, it says .io, and it's because this entire thing is a Jupyter notebook. Like this is a notebook they created and wrote all these things, and so that's why I called it an application instead of a web page. Although I think I refer to a web page in the Google Doc, but that's just for simplicity's sake. But this thing is part of its, this is like if you created the notebook and then put it in app mode, then here is everything that's going on. Let's see. And then the Colab one, we'll go ahead and open it and show it. It is actually an entire notebook itself that pretty much just gives you a quick rundown on how to work with it. The biggest difference between Jupyter Notebook and Colab in terms of layout is Colab works like a Google Doc, where like even you can make comments, if you look at the text option, it's very similar to a Google Doc text editing bar. And then the code is pretty similar as well, but that's pretty much the biggest difference there. Once we get into the actual hands-on practice, then the purpose of this wasn't necessarily to get into very extensive Python coding. It was just to show how different, like even though you have Python, you have to manipulate and change it depending on what kernel you're using, depending on where you're doing it, if it's on Jupyter Notebooks or in Colab or even Hydro-share. And so the first thing we did is I taught you how to, if you were using Miniconda, then you'd have to install it as such. I would say, have you guys been having, how many of you guys use Miniconda is the first question I should ask.
I use Miniconda.
I use Miniconda.
You too.
Okay, and I think that's because
Yeah.
Riley had you install Miniconda.
Well, I think this is when we do Tethys, Jacob, we kind of start off using Miniconda, and for most of the students when they're new, they don't know yet. It depends on if you're in the quasi Hydro-share project or Tethys, or you might be doing something, just accessing our forecast. So these are all different ways that they might end up needing to use it. So it's good to show the different ways to install and set Jupyter Notebook up, but probably most of them don't have a specific reason yet to choose one over the other.
That makes sense.
That makes sense?
Yeah. So with that in mind, even though Miniconda is really great and you can create your own environments, when you use, if you're specifically going to be using Jupyter Notebooks, and I guess this is where I failed to fully understand the difference, but then I've come to better understand it. You'd want to install Anaconda instead of just Miniconda. You can have both. Anaconda is just the complete version, whereas Miniconda is for more like individual tasks, or like you can create your own environments and create very specific things. So if you don't need all of the packages that Anaconda offers, then it won't matter as much. But if you install the Anaconda, and I can include a section on how to do that as well, even through Miniconda, there's a way to install the full package or the full Anaconda. Then you won't run into as many problems later on, because Jupyter Notebook is heavily dependent on all of the packages that Anaconda offers and not so much what Miniconda offers. I think Evan was making a lot of comments about how he had to reinstall a lot of things that Anaconda already has pre-installed, but Miniconda does not. And so I'll include a section on what I can include a whole thing here for whoever's putting in the OpenEDX version of this, so that it has both if you're using Conda or Miniconda, so it's easier to move forward from there.
Kind of a stupid question, if that's all right.
What was that?
I have kind of a dumb question.
What's that?
So I thought I was using Miniconda, but I'm not really sure, because when I typed it in, I typed in my search bar Anaconda, and then I have two options. I have Anaconda prompt Miniconda 3 or Anaconda prompt Anaconda 3. So I was just wondering what the difference was between those two.
One is specifically only using what Miniconda carries, like the packages you've installed yourself into that environment, and then Anaconda 3 has the full thing. Like mine, I don't have Miniconda, I believe, because I just chose to only install Anaconda. And so I just have the Anaconda prompt, Anaconda 3. Another benefit of using, if you have installed the whole Anaconda package, is you can still have Miniconda, but then you have like right here, I have Jupyter Notebook just on standby. I don't even have to put it into the prompt. I can just click here. Or even in the navigator, you can find Jupyter Notebook and Jupyter Lab in the navigator. And then they work similar to what happens if you're putting it in the terminal. The terminal is my preferred way because it's very quick to open. These ones are a little bit more slow because they're trying to rewire go around a few things, where it's a lot quicker if you just put it into the terminal. And so if you don't,
That's not a dumb question, by the way, Anna.
no,
And
that
I
was a
think,
great
Thank
question.
you.
I think part of the point for this training too is that not to get too hung up over all of the differences, but to become familiar, and later when you're on a specific project where maybe you're going to use Jupyter, remember that there's some differences, right, in
Yeah.
how you're installing it, and you maybe direct it or decide to choose one way over the other. Because Jacob's doing a lot of things with Quasi and HydroShare through Jupyter, he's definitely wants to be using Anaconda. But when we're doing Tethys applications, sometimes we're not using Jupyter very much, only to test a little bit of code. You might be in Miniconda. And I think to do the exercises, you can follow through here. It might be that later on your specific project, you would have a clean install, right? Come back to here to kind of set the environment up the way that it'll be most efficient for you.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you get caught up in some of the later programming, or like in just code, inputting code, it's not necessarily the point of it is just to show you like the cool widgets and the cool things you can do with Jupyter Notebook for when you're like creating, depending whatever project you're working on, you can just rely on it for, like, whether it's in my case where right now I'm planning on recoding and updating an entire app on HydroShare using Jupyter Notebooks. So I'm going to have to use the full Anaconda package, whereas if you're doing a Tethys project, you might just, like Dr. Nelson said, just use small snippets of it and just test to see if it works. And then later on in this actual like hands-on part, the main focus I want to do is just show you, like, if you needed to move around to different aspects or different libraries or different, like moving from notebook to notebook, you'll notice that even if your Miniconda can't run everything, you should be able to run everything effectively in Colab because it's got everything built in. It's not like it has everything there. You don't have to worry about using up space using Colab. But moving on from there, once you put in your terminal Jupyter Notebook, if you've already installed everything, then you'll have this little guy show up for this. And I pulled him up a second ago. Where'd he go? As far as I know, I haven't been able to actually use anything beyond this point. Once you run Jupyter Notebook, everything is pretty much it's like it won't let you move any further, and that's when you just have to start coding using your actual notebooks. And it'll take you to this directory. Here's where you keep everything. You can make more folders or more files to better organize it. I'm not the most organized with my directory, as you can see. And I have a couple notebooks I've started here. I do a lot more on HydroShare than I would on my personal. Sometimes I do things on here just because it's easier than trying to reinstall things in Quasi HydroShare, but it really depends on what you're doing with like why you're creating that project and how you need to do it. So then once you get to your directory, then you can create a new one. Over here, you'd hit new. Mine, I only have Python 3. You can install other languages. I only have Python 3 installed because that's what we mostly use. And then you create the new one. Mine's down here in BYU-Hydro-202. And then if you just follow through the process, it's pretty much showing you just a couple of the text. I think I have you go through a couple more pages in that web application page, whatever we want to call it, or just runs you through the basics of it. It talks about the different kernels. It talks about these guys here. You go through it pretty neatly. It's not the most complicated thing. And then we end up later on talking about how to run code and all the different things it can show off. how to do the markdown cells. The markdown cells is the text cells, and then the code cells are the ones with code in them. With markdown cells, you can do a lot just to help with visualizing what you're doing with your code. And there's also a bunch of keyboard shortcuts built into this thing as well. So moving on from there, you just kind of follow along. It's pretty simple. Talking about the different parts, you just kind of put together, make it look neat. Because if you're creating a Jupyter notebook, depending on what you're using it for, and you might even find like in some of your classes, you may, like you can do Excel spreadsheets with coding, or you can even do it in notebook. Like I'm in hydraulics engineering right now, and our professor is going to show us some coding for one of the homework assignments, but I think I'm going to try to do it in Jupyter Notebook instead of on Excel, just because I'm trying to test myself with it. And so it just helps with a bunch of things like that. And by keeping it more clean, and then like keeping notes like a title, subtitles, you're able to keep track of things a lot easier than if it was just comments in a bunch of code. So then down here, that's where we start going forward. If you're doing Miniconda, you're gonna have to install IPyLeaflet and IPyWidgets, and you can do those in the notebook, or you can do it in your terminal if you want. You'd have to close your terminal or your prompt, however you wanna call it. And when you do that, it's actually gonna cancel out these here. I'll show you what it looks like for anyone that hasn't done it. If you close it, then you'll notice that it can't connect to the kernel, connection has failed, and so you can't use it anymore. Like it won't even let you, like, you can try adding things to it, but it won't save at all. And so you're gonna have to close out of them anyway. And then relaunch it again. And I'll just show you really quick what that looks like. It'll take a second. And then it relaunches it. And then if you notice, it says all that, and you just have to rerun all, and then you should be good. So then I just wanted to show you a couple of the cool widgets you can do. For the full extent of what we do in the lab, you may not need to use any of these widgets, but say you're trying to figure something out, there's a bunch of cool little shortcuts you can do. These ones are just some basic ones, like one that counts, just like it counts in a replay. One that's just a sliding bar of, it's just a slider for different values. And so you can, if you're running something that's based off like a specific number, but you want to test a bunch of numbers, you can just kind of keep shifting this along, and then it'll keep calculating things. A load bar, a combo box. If you're familiar with from 170 using combo boxes in VBA, then it's very similar to that one. And then the next part is a pretty cool section on maps. And I know we use ArcGIS for most things, but I wanted to show this off with Jupyter Notebook because Dr. Ames had me start looking into it for some of the future things he wanted to do, just to see like how effective can you actually use IPyLeaflet, which is just, it pretty much like takes mapping from Esri and ArcGIS stuff and makes it into a Jupyter Notebook widget. And so when you have it installed up here, doing it like this, just putting this import with the little asterisk, pretty much imports everything from IPyLeaflet instead of just like specific things. And it's, in this case, you're not even really like downloading it. It's just saying we're going to borrow from here, we're going to import all these things from there. And you're able to create certain things. I know some people have been having problems with it, and that could be because it's you're using the Miniconda prompt instead of the Anaconda. And so that just goes back to like what Dr. Nelson said. Sometimes you'll need to depend on what you're needing it to use for. I know there's different ways to code and different ways to use ArcGIS instead of just using IPyLeaflet, but this is just a very quick and simple way to show off the visualization tools of notebooks instead of trying to get to a very exhaustive understanding of the different applications. I just wanted to show off something very, very simple to show off the tools. Does anyone have any questions before I go on?
I had a question about like the widget things.
Yeah.
So when I like ran the code, it didn't show like the combo box at the end. It just showed like an output code. So how do you get like those to show up?
That could be from the mini Conda.
Okay.
Like you might need to download something. I was looking into that and I didn't have as much time before this, and so I'm gonna have to write it down. There are things called extensions that some are pre-built into Jupyter notebooks through Anaconda, but if you have mini Conda, then you have to install the extensions. And those extensions are pretty much just what pop out sorry, I can't say that word today. The visualization tools that allow these things to appear.
Okay.
So I think that just comes down to, I just assumed mini Conda would have that, but that was my fault. But that's what it kind of, these are what they're supposed to look like when they pop out, when you put it in. And it's just, you have to, with mini Conda, you just have to install or import whatever you need to do. But in short, depending on what your computer is or your, whatever it is, like whatever it runs on, like mine shows up in the Windows format. If you have a Mac and you do the drop down, it'll show up how a Mac drop down would look. That's just kind of how it plays along with it. And you do the same here. This one's a little bit different. Combo Box uses, I'm blanking on the word right now, whether you're using a Windows or a Mac, whereas this one just uses its own pre-built function. And then that's what happens with the maps as well. I know some people had problems with the maps. I was helping a few people earlier through text on that. And then you can see just you can, if you need to, you can show up a bunch of different layers. You can set different boundaries. I could change it from, instead of being over Sweden, we can move it to, let's see, what's one of them? What happens if we do 50? Oh, I don't want that. Now we're over the rest of Europe. But that was just to showcase that. And then after, I just wanted to showcase the widgets here. Then when you move on, you're going to create another notebook. And this is where we're going to actually start like moving it around, and we do a little bit of time series data analysis. If you did Riley's collab exercise on pandas, this should be a much simpler version. I don't walk you through it because I'm hoping that you'll rely back on that previous experience and you'll go back and look at how he did it, or you'll read the pandas documentation, which I do include down here for anyone that needs it. Maybe I should include it up there by it. It's right there. The following link provides the full pandas documentation. But was there any questions, or was anyone having difficulties with anything up to this point, or this whole creating the time series analysis notebook?
I wasn't able to get the app mode or app view to work. So what does that do? I don't know if my issue was it was a mini Conda thing, but what does app view do?
It's entirely possible it was a mini Conda thing. I'd have to install mini Conda and look at how it differs. That was my bad. But what it does is, and I'll show you, this is actually screenshots from, where'd I go? Oh, wrong one. There it is. My time series analysis, these right here are actually screenshots from the app mode. And what you notice is, so I have all this code here, right? I'm gonna save that really. Oh no, I don't need to save that one. Yeah, I have all this code written here. And I'm gonna hit cell, run all, give it a second to, as it recognizes things. Now it pops out this very, very ugly looking data frame with all these unknowns and everything. And then I have it clean it up by redefining the data frame to only a select few columns, so that it looks a little bit cleaner. You can actually get rid of the variable name since everything's discharge, and also the data type, so that all you have is the date time and the date value, or the data value, if you wanted to. And then there's more code here. I created a histogram just for fun. I mean, you don't use them too often with what we do, but I just thought it'd be fun to show it off. And then you need to create another scatter plot. But then going to app mode, it should be fine. It pretty much pops out. It only gives you the outputs. If you notice, it's running. It only gives you the outputs. It doesn't show the code. So that way, if you're doing a presentation and you're just wanting to, or you're like up here like this thing, like sure they had to put a lot of code in when they, this is screenshots of the code, or in other ones, I think. Here's one for the IPy leaflet. You don't have to showcase what code you use to put in everything. You can just showcase the outputs so people just see what they're looking at. You don't have to worry too much about the ugly code in the background.
In a way, you can think of this as like a small Tethys app, right? That you don't need to have the whole Tethys platform and portal and everything, but contained within your Jupyter notebook is an app, right?
Yeah. It's just like that. And so when we get back to it, this part is the hardest part of the module, like, because I don't tell you how to put it together. A lot of it is pretty much what you did in Riley's collab notebook, except for the average, the max, the min, the median, and the mode, just to showcase those. But you can find those through the pandas documentation. They're actually very simple lines of code. If we exit app mode, I can show you. It's as simple as putting the DF data frame, choosing the data value name, and then put mean right after it. That's with a close parentheses after. That's literally all you do. And then it pops it out. And then the rest of this is just naming it off for you. Then from there, once you have that finished, then we're going to show, like, in some cases, like you may be working on a notebook or you may be working on your own code here, and then you need to move it somewhere else. Instead of just copying and pasting that code, like say you have a bunch of cells you want to use, you can download the notebook following these steps. And you can't actually open it. Like in my case, if I downloaded it, it would show up in the bottom left-hand corner like so, like over here. But you can't open it because it can only exist in certain environments. It can't just open up and, oh, boom, you have a notebook. You have to specifically download to a directory or existing notebook in order for it to work. And so from there, we go to Google Collaboratory. And if you're familiar with Google Drive, I'll even just pop it up and show you. Let's go to Google Drive. Like here's my Google Drive here. If you hit new, you go down to more, there's a Google Collaboratory just right there. There's other things you can do as well, like Google Apps Script and things, but for the purpose of like notebooks, you have Google Collaboratory right there. And when you go to that, I'm not going to create a new one. I'm just going to go to the one I already have created. Should be, I think, this one. It's the latest one. It's going to be a little weird, and you have to like hit with open with Google Collaboratory. It's a little weirder, the interface. Oh no, this is the old one. Let me go to the new one. Yeah, this is the new one. Okay. Okay. So when you move it over, like I have you go through a quick short video just walking you through some of the cool things Notebook can do, or Colab can do, I mean. And then it goes through how you upload your notebooks. And when you get it uploaded, everything should be the exact same. Any problems you were having with Miniconda before should be solved here now, because Colab should have all of it downloaded. And then when you're on there, you have to add some line of code. And I did this because I know we use GitHub a lot, and you can just import things straight from there. Like in Riley's Colab, he created a specific time series in GitHub, and then he had it imported in directly to the notebook, so you wouldn't have to worry about it. But say in the future you're working with someone and outside of the lab and you're doing stuff like this, like in your professional career, and the guy doesn't know how to use GitHub, and so he just sends you this weird CSV file with a bunch of time series data. And you're just like, well, I could put it on GitHub or whatnot, or I could just pull it from my files like he gave me. And so you put in this code here above your CSV, and you're able to go ahead and run all. And you should be able to upload it from there. Like it's going to create a cool choose files thing. Then you go to it, you open it, and you can go look for it. Where do I have it hiding down here? And then you should be good from there. And then it should be able to run completely, because then now it can run here, 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 and then your whole notebook's good now. And so that's just one thing to show off like the differences between Notebook or Jupyter and Colab. And from there, we're going to go to HydroShare, which in a lot of ways, HydroShare is very similar to Tethys, but HydroShare is in a slightly bigger community and how they do things. It's a lot more about open data sharing, and it's not so much about having these free apps for other people to use or creating these apps. HydroShare is just all about open source data sharing. And so I want you to like go through and just like look at it. I mean, you may never use HydroShare in your time in the lab if that's not something you work with, but it's just a handy tool to know about. In fact, a lot of the apps, I thought, if I'm not mistaken, the National Water Model, which I'm working on, was taken from Tethys, because I've been looking at its source code and it says a lot of it has been used in Tethys. And so this is just, it's very similar to Tethys in that sense. And then you go to the Quasi-Jupyter Hub after you've explored the site for a little bit. And here it's good because how Jupyter Hub works and its specific environment, you may not be able to access it completely. Like I'm going to try running it. And hopefully it works. Oh, good, it worked. Sometimes it'll crash and then you have to reload a few times or you have to exit and go on. And it depends on if other people who are using the app are running very heavy data sets, then it can cause other people to not be able to join. And so you see we come down here. I've already uploaded both the 202 and our time series analysis here. And you just follow the steps on how to install them. Once you get into it though, because Jupyter Hub is and you might run across this in a professional career or in other instances where you have to work within someone else's preset environment. There's ways you can get around like putting in what you need by doing this code here. And that was just to show off that code. And then there's not much beyond that in terms of how these notebooks work. This works just Jupyter Hub works on Quasi works just the same as a normal Jupyter notebook. And then the final thing I show off, or I wanted to show off, was a very handy Jupyter lab for those who, if you're going to do a lot of work with Jupyter notebooks in your specific, in whatever specific case, and you want to be able to look at everything you're working with at once, you can use Jupyter Lab. And at the beginning, we had an install on Jupyter Lab. And I'll showcase that really quick. Let me select Python 3. Give it a second. And then you can see like how all of your different notebooks are open at once. You can do a console over here where it's very much like the prompt. That's how you do it over there. And then you can do everything at once instead of having to jump back and forth between things. But in short, that's pretty much just a quick introduction to the different notebooks, tools, and things you can do with Jupyter, Colab, Jupyter Lab. There's a lot of different variations out there, like CoCalc allows you to edit notebooks in real time, but you have to pay for those services. And a lot of other notebook-based applications are specifically based on Jupyter Notebook. So like Google doesn't have a version of Jupyter Lab. Jupyter Lab came out in 2018, and so everyone's still trying to figure out how to work with that and how to move around it. It's pretty much if Project Jupyter decides to do something, everyone else will eventually copy it, because Project Jupyter is they're the creators of these things. But does anyone have any questions thus far from everything we've talked about? Anything we need to go over again?
Jacob, thanks. That's really well done and gives a really good kind of perspective, introduction of the power of Jupyter notebooks. So again, I know many of you, it's not exactly clear if or how you might be involved you might be in using Jupyter Notebook, but I think this is really helpful to get the broader picture.
Yeah.
And it's a very helpful tool as you're kind of developing Python code, whether it goes in Tethys or it's standalone to do your own projects or whatever. Very powerful tool.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Anything else while we have Jacob online?
Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned early on that you recommend installing Anaconda. I've done it both ways, and I always felt like Anaconda gave me a whole lot of excess overhead I didn't really need, and I didn't have any problems finding the libraries I need with Miniconda. Is that's not your experience?
I guess it's, oh, I dropped my mouse. I guess it's just because I'm not as experienced with coding, and so for me it's really handy to have it already there for me. But like once I get more experience and I know like, oh, I don't need these things, I don't need it as much, like I can see the benefits of Miniconda from a more experienced coding perspective, but as a beginner myself, I like being able to have everything on hand, like instead of having to look for it as much. I guess that's just my preference.
Okay. I was wondering if there are some particular packages that you'd run into that are in Anaconda but not Miniconda that were problematic.
Well, for one, I think you have to install Pandas and Plotly and a couple of the other ones, like even what's another one that was on here that we used? The IPy widgets and all of them. And so those are pre-installed in Anaconda. All of them are, but they're not in Miniconda. And so if you, like for me, if I'm just trying to go quickly move through it, having the Anaconda and I just already have all those packages that I need, then I can run through it. Or there's times where I've been creating something and I've had to look up different ways to do it, and then people suggest, oh, try importing this. And I mean, I could easily just import it or install it and then import it with Miniconda, but if it's already in Anaconda, then I can just import it.
Yeah.
I guess yeah.
One thing you might consider adding to your lesson there is, you know, if someone does choose to go Miniconda, you know, sometimes I think in our little primer we had in the past, we had like a list of, here are some really commonly used libraries, you know, like pandas and stuff like, and then you just, you know, conda install, conda. It's just a few lines.
Yeah.
Might, you know, if you choose to go with Miniconda, here are some really commonly used things you want to try. Let me look at our Tethys training, our old website, and see if it has a list of. So yeah, what we put on here before was NumPy, Matplotlib, Pandas, Jupyter, PyShape, PyProj, NetCDF4, a few things like that. But
Okay. So we could easily include that if we want to here.
yeah.
Well, and also I think don't we have the lesson where we set up Miniconda? I mean, with Riley's lesson, maybe that's where it belongs, where we're really focused
Yeah,
on
that's entirely possible. I know, and I don't know in the entirety of how much it would affect using Miniconda, but I know one person reached out to me and their coding was perfectly fine. They installed IPy leaflets and everything correctly, but they weren't able to run the map. Like it just wouldn't show up. And I was thinking, and we talked about that, or one person had a question about the widgets not showing up. That might just be part of something else you'd have to install in order to get certain things to work if you're using notebooks. But if you're not planning on using notebooks that much in the lab, I don't think it'd be that big of a deal. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what you're saying is that if you install Anaconda, there's lots of dependencies and other things that you won't run into, whereas otherwise you're going to have to figure those things out as they come along. And we've figured out several of them, particularly for projects and things that we use towards Tethys, which Dr. Jones just mentioned. But there's lots of other things out there, of course, that you might have to figure out if you're starting from Miniconda.
Yeah. And that's why I could see, like, from a beginner perspective, it's nice to have all of those already. You don't have to worry about the dependencies if you're not.
I mean, it goes both ways too, right?
Okay.
Because
yeah,
it also stays as a big black box, and you're installing lots of things you don't ever need. That's
True.
kind of what Dr. Jones was saying, you know, and as you get more comfortable, and as you mentioned, as you're more experienced programmer, you're more comfortable being able to find out and realize that it's a dependency issue. I just need to go get this other package.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's super easy to just do conda install as long as you know the name of it.
That's true. Yeah.
But this is a great start, and it exposes some of these different things, which is really good, you know.
Yeah, very good.
And depending on your use of Jupyter, and again, I think because you're doing it through the HydroShare site, there's more things there that you're doing than we have typically used before, and so it's been really helpful, though.
Yeah, great job.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think what's up next? I should have looked at my schedule, but I think we're starting to get into some of the HTML and CSS next week. So we'll try to make sure that's ready. I think Gio and Kyler and some others have been working on that. So we'll see you tomorrow.